All right, I think we're ready to go. Okay. Um, so first things first, let's look at Unit 3, Foreign Affairs, Imperialism in Post-World War One. So learning target 15. It says, analyze the circumstances which enable the United States to emerge um, as a world power in the early 1900s. So let's look at the circumstances there. Okay. So we talked about how the frontier closed in 1890, and America's expansion was then limited to really the Pacific and the Caribbean and possibly up north. And we knew that wasn't going to happen up north. So essentially, we are going to expand into the Pacific and into the Caribbean. So we talked about what factors contributed to American imperialism. Okay, so there's four just general causes. So number one, it's going to open up new markets for our trade, especially Asia. So people who are willing to buy our goods. So our industry is booming. In order to deal with our surplus of goods, you want to open up new trade markets. It's just like if you have a booming business, you don't want to have just one store if your products are in high demand. You want to open up new stores. So, for example, when Buddy LaRosa opened up his one pizza place on Boudinot and things were going great and it was packed every night, he decides, hey, let's open up one in Delhi. Then next thing you know, he's opening up another one in Western Hills, and he's going to expand over to the east side or north side and so on and so forth. And next thing you know, he's got a Cincinnati, um, landmark in La Rosa's that's expanding everywhere. Okay. Same thing goes for these big U.S. steel companies like U.S. Steel or Standard Oil. They're just not going to sell in the United States. They want to open up markets to other nations. Okay. The second big thing um, on that list is new naval bases. We talked about how America's Navy was growing. Eventually, we're going to have the Great White Fleet. Okay. So you want to have naval bases, coaling stations to the naval bases so you can mobilize all across the United, or not the United States, all across the globe. Okay. And also get from one part of the United States to the other. Eventually, we're going to, practice that imperialism and get involved in places like Panama, right? We talk about the Panama Canal, the Roosevelt Corollary, all that stuff too. Cultural superiority. We're going to spread democracy, our way of life. Some people even will claim that we're going to spread Christianity, although that's not really the case. It's going to be mostly spreading democracy, American culture. But that's mostly justification. That's not really a factor that contributes to it. It's mostly justification of it. And the last thing is a search for raw materials, okay, minerals, iron ore, okay, for our industry. So those are the four big factors there. So examples of U.S. imperialism we're going to talk about that we talked about in the past. We're not going to hammer them here today. It's just mostly a review. The annexation of Hawaii in 1898, which began almost a decade prior to that with a intervention there from thank you, which became evident from planters involved in Hawaii who were fearing European annexation of Hawaii, led by Sanford Dole and other American planters who staged a coup of Queen Liliuokalani and got the help of U.S. Marines to stage that coup. And eventually, in 1898, we annexed Hawaii, used as a naval base as well as a stepping stone to China. And then the Spanish-American War. And the Spanish-American War is a definite example of to the victors go the spoils. The U.S. got the Philippines and the Pacific. And that's why on that political cartoon you guys have there, okay, you see Uncle Sam hugging the globe, and on the left-hand side, he's holding the American flag, and he's planting it there at Manila, the capital of the Philippines. And on the right-hand side, you see him planting the American flag on the capital of Puerto Rico. Okay, So after the Spanish-American War was fought, we took over Spanish territory in the Philippines. We established a naval base in Cuba. We took over Puerto Rico and Guam. So America had holdings in those territories as well. Some of the causes behind the Spanish-American War that we talked about prior to this. This is way back. If you guys remember, back in November, prior to Thanksgiving, um, we talked about the big time causes behind that in 1898 was protecting American investments in Cuba. We had sugar. Remember sugar? In Cuba, we had over $100 million invested there. And when the war broke out between Cuba and Spain for Cuban independence, we wanted to protect our investments. Um, then there was U.S. intervention that took place after a United States um, naval vessel was destroyed. The Maine, which we know now was caused by a kitchen fire, but we thought due to yellow journalism was caused by a Spanish mine or a Spanish attack. When that happened, the yellow journalists, who were the sensationalized journalists led by the Hertz and Pulitzer papers, began to push towards war. The war hawks were calling for war, and President McKinley got what we called his splendid little war. And the war was over very quickly. It was fought in the Philippines and in Cuba, where they portrayed General Weyler as the butcher of Cuba after he established concentration camps, not like the Holocaust type concentration camps, but he was rounding up Cuban revolutionaries in camps. And it was seen almost as a liberation movement, the Cuba Libre liberation movement. And then once the war was over, we signed a Treaty of Paris, where we were awarded those territories, and then we also paid Spain for those territories as well. Okay, so we benefited greatly from that, and America was able to expand. Let's take a look at the next page. Okay, learning target 16, and in 16 we're talking about America's entry into World War I very briefly, and then what happened after World War I, which is a big time topic, because tomorrow we'll talk about the Great Depression and World War II. So in World War I, America was isolated prior to that. Well, we were reluctant to join in the fight across the pond with our British and French brethren against the German onslaught. We were staying out of those European affairs. However, as our trade began to increase with the French and the English after the British blockade of Germany, U.S. trade and U.S. investment was threatened due to the German U-boats and the unrestricted submarine warfare we talked about. Remember the Unterseebooten, right? The German U-boats were destroying American shipping, and so American merchants and American property was being destroyed. There was also the incident of the sinking of the SS Lusitania, as well as other passenger liners. There were civilian deaths, mostly British civilians, but at the Lusitania, there were over 100 Americans that were killed, and that was a tragedy. But still, we did not declare war. And it wasn't until really the Zimmerman telegram, or the Zimmerman note, this is referred to, where Germany asked Mexico to declare war on the United States in the event of us entering the war. When that was released to the American press after it was intercepted, America felt it was time to declare war and join the side of the Allies. And when that happened, the tides had turned. The Americans had added a great deal of energy to the war, and the war ended within a year. Now, here's the big topic. Okay, here's what I would definitely write down the back of your paper or somewhere on that answer sheet somewhere. Okay. The question says, why did the U.S. Senate reject the League of Nations? How did this reflect a movement towards isolationism? Now, if you guys remember, after the war, President Wilson proposed a 14-point plan to the nations of Great Britain and France to help solve the problem that he perceived as a future in Europe of despair and hopelessness due to what happened in World War I. World War I was awful. It was the Great War. It was the war to end all war. So Wilson proposed 14 points that he felt would ensure peace in Europe and prevent a future war. And the Brits and the French were very upset with that. They did not like his plan, mostly because the Yanks were late to the party, as they like to say. Um, One British official even commented that the good Lord only had 10 commandments, yet President Wilson had 14, basically saying that who does President Wilson think he is? But the one thing they did like was the idea of a League of Nations. Ironically, though, President Wilson, in an attempt to get the League of Nations passed, and the one big part of it was Article 10 was the big issue in the Versailles Treaty. The U.S. basically rejected it. The Senate rejected that. And the big reason for the rejection of the Versailles Treaty by the United States and the League of Nations was that we would lose our independence because it would pull us into foreign conflicts. Agree or disagree with that, many U.S. senators and congressmen believe that it's our decision whether or not we should go to war. We should not leave it up to our allies to decide whether or not we do that. Okay. So that destroyed Wilson. He was basically distraught over that. He was so stressed out. Many people believe that that's why he had his health issue that basically pretty much made him bedridden for the remainder of his presidential term. So what happened after the effects of that? America basically remained isolated. We signed the 4, 5, and 9 power treaties to limit arms and monitor other nations, which allowed Japan to grow in power. And we were one of the nations to also sign the Kellogg-Briand Pact. Okay. I left a G out there. Okay. The Kellogg-Briand Pact basically outlawed war as an instrument of national policy, which is a very, very immature way of looking at things. So sometimes war is necessary, but it's almost like so my generation would say that war is bad. Don't do that. Or you're going to timeout. This didn't help either eventually with Hitler when he starts expanding and we say, no, that's bad. Don't do that. And Hitler basically said, what are you going to do? Outlaw war? Sometimes you got to stand up to a bully, and this prevented us from doing that. Does this make sense? These are examples of us staying isolated. And we talked about how we had the America First campaign after World War I, stay out of the war and all that stuff. Okay, or I'm sorry, before World War I, the America First campaign and the KKK was talking about that too. And, all right. Are we good on that? Okay. The last one, prosperity, depression, and the New Deal on this topic. And we're going to get for Target 17, and we'll talk about the New Deal tomorrow in the Roaring 20s. But we're going to talk here about learning Target 17, which is describe how racial intolerance, anti-immigrant attitudes, and the Red Scare contributed to social unrest during World War I. All right. So I'm going to hide this for a second, and I'm going to let you guys take a few minutes, and you can read over that, but there are at least 4 examples you can find if you guys I'll scroll up there on there where it says intolerance of the 1920s. So look for example of intolerance of the 1920s there. If you read over those 4 paragraphs, you will find plenty of examples there of intolerance of the 1920s. So look for plenty of examples there. If you want to add others to it, you can also add others to it as well. Okay? All right, so I'll give you guys like 2 or 3 minutes to scan over that and look for 4 examples for these. Let's take a look. So, what do you guys think? What are some things you guys would add? What do you got, Kurt?
Racial intolerance.
Well, yeah. So, what are examples of intolerance? What we're looking for?
Jim Crow laws.
Okay, Jim Crow laws, like what? Okay, so definitely lynching is one. I would agree. That was a big problem still going on in the 1920s. What else? What else reemerged in the 1920s? Yeah, the KKK for sure. And this was a new KKK. They were no longer just targeting African Americans. It was all about equal opportunity hatred. So they were hating on Jews, Catholics, immigrants. Okay. What else was going on? Due to the overcrowding of cities and racial intolerance in the north in some cities, like Kurt was talking about. In 1919, one of the hottest summers of the century. Brandon.
The Red Summer.
Yeah, the Red Summer, some of the race riots in 1919, the Red Summer. Okay, here's what I put down. So we had lynchings in the South, Red Summer, the race riots that were occurring, 25 cities in 1919. Okay, the KKK with a new platform of hatred. The first Red Scare, persecution of Eastern and Southern, and then the first Red Scare with communism taking hold in Europe for the first time, in Russia, um, and the fear of it spreading towards America. There was a persecution of Eastern and Southern European immigrants in America. We talk about the Palmer raids, right? American Attorney General A. Mitchell Palmer launched a series of raids on unions, targeted immigrants, unions mostly, radical newspapers, um, professed anarchist groups, radical groups, protesters who supported this. And that's when we start seeing immigration quotas in the 1920s emerge, 1921, 1924, to address the influx of new immigrants, as we called them, right? The post 1890 wave of immigrants from Southern and Eastern Europe. Okay. And we had those immigration laws in place all the way until 1965 due to that fear. Okay. All right. So, what I need you guys to do in the back, there are a series of questions there you guys can work on. And also, if you go onto your Google Classroom, take a look. Okay. There are 2 practice quizzes on they're not on Edulastic, they're open ended. So it means they're on the Ohio Test Prep site. So if you open them, they just go right there. So if you take a screenshot of them after you take them and share them with me, I'll give you extra credit. But they're like, I think one test or one quiz is 5 questions, the other one is 4. Okay, so it's good practice. Then tomorrow we'll go over the New Deal, we'll go over World War II stuff, and we'll review for the rest of your exam. I'll give you your study guide that you can use to help you overnight. That you guys already have with the answer sheet and everything. We'll prep for your test on Thursday. All right. Okay. Good luck.